Welcome to the new Cyber Frontier, bringing you the latest news on the local Colorado economy and initiatives that focus on the development of cybersecurity economics. You don't have to be a computer or cybersecurity expert to get plugged in. Your host, Chris Gorog, brings it straightforward, asks the tough questions, and brings the cyber world to a level of understanding for everyone. Chris is personable and opens up with our guests on the issues we all would like to see addressed. You can find us on the web at www.newcyberfrontier.com. Now join our host as he introduces the topic for today's New Cyber Frontier.
Welcome to today's episode of New Cyber Frontier. On today, we're going to talk a little bit startup and some interesting ways that things you might be looking for from a serial entrepreneur that can give us some insight from the cybersecurity industry also about how we might manage our own startup if you're at that stage of your life, or some interesting facts about what new technology that they've come up with as well. But today, Ben Johnson, the CTO and co-founder of Obsidian Security. Welcome, Ben. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for coming on New Cyber Frontier. First of all, we're going to talk about your startup, which is very interesting. Something new every day you learn cybersecurity when you talk to people in startups, that's for sure. But first of all, I want to know, and our listeners always want to know, your background. How did you get to be where you're at? How did you get to be a serial entrepreneur on second or third startup, which we also want to talk about too, but we'll get to that. But we want to know about you and your background and what made you how you tick.
Yeah, so, it's always fun to talk about yourself, although it's always, kind of weird to just kind of say, hey, this is all the things I've done. So, but yeah, I think I always find it interesting how people get to where they're at and what their story is. My story is actually kind of humorously started with a movie. So I started by, I was watching Enemy of the State with Will Smith and Gene Hackman in college. And this was like 99 or something like that. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. And, NSA had a prominent role in that. And at the time, NSA was no such agency. It wasn't very public. They didn't really let reporters and cameras in yet. And I basically applied the next day. And I said, wow, this is cool. I want to go see if I can work there. And I ended up actually, getting in and working there as a computer scientist. And so I did intelligence community work from the year 2000 to about 2007, and just fell in love with security, right? So I was always a computer science geek. I was always writing code or playing with computers, et cetera. But, security wasn't what it is today. It was, there's some vulnerabilities, or someone can, telnet in somewhere and make something do something it shouldn't, or spoof an email, but it wasn't really the same thing. But then going to NSA, it really opened my eyes to all the different, aspects of national security, or just, sort of cybersecurity in general, and I loved it. And then, it was awesome. And as a side note, I highly recommend, if anyone is interested in defense or intelligence community, there's just a lot of really cool problems to solve, a lot of important missions, that kind of thing. But then I actually took a 2-year hiatus from security, and I went to the financial world. And I really loved writing code for traders, so I basically had been doing some of my own trading on the sort of side, and I said, you know what, I want to try writing these complicated calculation engines and whatnot, and it was awesome, and I loved it, met a lot of great people, learned a lot, had to write some new languages. You had to have very great performance and uptime, right, because if something goes down, it could cost millions of dollars very quickly when you're talking about trading lots of equity assets or other things. But I missed security. And so in 2009, I ended up leaving the financial world and going back to security, actually to a startup where I worked with some guys that had created this company called Kairos, which was people that I had worked with previously in the defense world. And I was actually the first employee to join. So a few guys started it, and then I was first employee, so I was still like the fourth or fifth person. And it was awesome, right? You go in, you don't really know what you're going to be working on. You're trying to pay the bills. You're trying to be scrappy. You're trying to, sort of figure out like what's your team's purpose, what's your mission, what are you good at, and we can go into all that more. I know as we want to talk about startups. But then while we were there, we started getting called by some former colleagues of ours who were getting hacked by China at the time, like Operation Aurora attacks. And we were getting called in and saying, hey guys, can you please help us do incident response, clean up, figure out like what's going on, are we still infected, etc. And what we witnessed was people were basically just doing digital forensics to try to do incident response. And so to put it another way, you basically go in and you make copies of everyone's hard drives, and then you scour those and hope that you find some artifacts, some binary that was left there, some prefetch files, whatever. But it was very much after the fact. It was very laborious and time consuming and expensive. And so that's where we came up with the idea for Carbon Black, which is now, a big endpoint security company. But we said, what if you could do incident response in seconds? What if you recorded all the activity as it occurred so you could rewind the tape? And then from there, we started saying, well, if we're actually watching this activity for response purposes, we could actually do detection and then maybe help remediate or help block some things too. So there's a whole bunch that happened. But essentially, we just kept, building and iterating and trying to solve the problems that we saw firsthand and make something that we thought security teams would want to use and it would fit into the security stack. And then it kind of grew from there.
All right.
And again, we can go back to any of this stuff.
Let's take a break real quick.
But,
can we stop here real quick? Let's take a break real quick, hear from our sponsors, and we're going to come back and finish your story from Carbon Black on, because a lot of people have heard of Carbon Black. Be right back.
We'll be right back with the rest of today's show right after these brief messages from our sponsors. Cyber Resilience Institute helps build strong cyber communities designed to prevent members from attack. Like building a neighborhood watch, it takes coordination and a sharing community to protect our identities and valuables in the virtual world. Typically, we hear that organizations know they need to do something to protect their cyber assets, but don't know where to begin. Let Cyber Resilience Institute help your community create an action plan. Cyber Resilience Institute will build your community or business marketplace so that it is designed to support a collective cyber defense. Contact them for more information at cyberresilienceinstitute.org.
All right, welcome back to New Cyber Frontier. Today we're talking to serial entrepreneur Ben Johnson, the CTO and founder of Obsidian. But as we were talking right before the break, was a big part of Carbon Black, a company which a lot of us might have heard of. Ben, tell us about kind of your path from that point on in your entrepreneurial path.
Yeah, so going through the early journey of helping to start Carbon Black and then get first customers and grow it, and then we ended up actually merging with Bit9, which was a very well-respected basically endpoint prevention company, application control, whitelisting, etc. And then the combined entity ended up taking the Carbon Black name, and we just saw that thing grow from basically 0 people to when I left, it was around 800. And I had the fortunate role of basically being the field-fixing CTO, which was going in and talking to customers, working with partners, giving talks at conferences. But the best part of that was just the people that I get to meet. I get to just meet these amazing security teams, these thought leaders, all these different people, and just absorb their knowledge, basically, right?
Yeah.
But through that journey, I learned a lot, and I just loved the whole startup aspect and the whole startup sort of energy and uncertainty, and you have to make decisions, and you can have a huge impact on the trajectory. And so then I actually ended up going back to my University of Chicago, where I got my undergrad degree, and I talked to them, and I said, hey guys, can I teach entrepreneurship here? And they said, oh, well, that's perfect, because we're thinking of adding entrepreneurship into the computer science master's program. So I ended up actually teaching entrepreneurship for a couple years. Basically, you start out with nothing first day of class, and by the end of class, it's like Shark Tank, right, where people are pitching their ideas, and there's like a panel and stuff like that. So it's really fun. At least I enjoyed it. But through that, I really started to miss those very early days of a company when you kind of have anything is in front of you. Like, it's greenfield, it's open, it's white space. And so I made the very tough decision to leave Carbon Black. And, they're still going, they're doing great. They, have a ton of, some of my best friends are still there. doing some great things. But I made the decision to leave, and so that's where I ended up running into my new co-founders, Matt Wolf and Glenn Chisholm, and we decided to start Obsidian. And we decided to start it in Southern California. I'll happily continue, but I'll maybe take a break, and you can let me know, what you want to talk about from here. But, I think you can probably tell from my voice, and I get really excited. I really like the whole startup journey. I can hear that.
I have a word, we'll put it in edgewise here. I'm just messing with you. But this startup journey is amazing. I have so many, and I teach cybersecurity, and so many people I know, students especially, that are interested in startup. And they want to know from somebody who's been there, somebody who has that passion I hear in your voice, what that startup journey is like. So talk to those people right now, that young person. I actually have one in the room, my sound studio guy sitting here with big eyes listening to you, because he's like, I want to know, what's he have to say? So tell him, as he's listening in the background, about this startup journey and what you'd recommend. He wants to start a company. Talk to him.
Yeah, so I think this could be like a several week series. There's so many sort of lessons and tips. I think first of all, it's absolutely a roller coaster, right? You're going to have probably the highest of highs, and you're certainly going to have some very hard lows, right? And what I mean by that is, there's going to be times where you build something and people love it and you feel great, or you get that first check because a customer thinks there's enough value in this, tool or service or whatever you're providing to actually pay for it. But then there's going to be some lows. Competition beats you up, or someone says your product is bad, or you actually have a big technical glitch or bug, and that customers mad, or someone quits that you really needed on the team, right? So all of that stuff's going to happen. I think it's really having the passion and the sort of fortitude of saying, look, this is what I'm going to do for several years. However long this journey lasts, I'm going to keep going. I know I'm going to run into these walls or step in these potholes, or whatever analogy you want. But first of all, just knowing that you're getting yourself into a situation that's going to have those highs and lows. Secondly is people. The only reason I put the other one first is because you yourself have to be, sort of ready for what you're getting yourself into. But basically everything after that is about people. And it might be cliche a little bit, but, all your progress is going to be people, and essentially all your problems are going to be people. And so really starting to get to understand, who's your core team, and who do you really trust, and who's going to have your back. And, if you read startup entrepreneur literature or sort of textbooks, they basically say you need to find your soulmate, right? It's essentially like finding a spouse, because you're going to spend so much time. In fact, you might spend more time with your co-founders or the early employees than if you actually have a spouse. You might see these other people more than your spouse. But you have to know that you're going to go to battle together, and you're going to have each other's backs, right? And then as you grow, you're going to try to add to that. You're going to add people to the team, and you need to continue to add good talent. And it really becomes about talent density, and then how to course correct when people aren't necessarily aligned with the mission or performing at the level they should be. The other thing too is it's not just about employees, right? It's about how many people can you get on your side. And so really quickly that becomes different types of people, like investors, advisors, partners, customers. You need to have customers that are happy, that are going to say good things about you, right? So I would say throughout all of this journey, it's just reinforced for me so much around it's all about people, and then things like relationships and networking, right? The other thing I'll add, and then I tend to get excited, so I ramble on some of this stuff. The other thing I'll add is you need to blend what you view as the problem and you view as the solution with what you're hearing from customers, right? And too often the mistake entrepreneurs make is they build some cool technology, and then they try to find the problem. And you can look. I'm a huge geek in terms of YouTube clips on Steve Jobs or Reid Hoffman or all these other entrepreneurial icons. That you can go find quotes of them saying this kind of stuff. But too often it's you build technology and you try to find a problem, whereas really you need to find the problem, and then you can go build the technology to solve it, right? So find that problem either through your day-to-day work, like if you're in the trenches in a cybersecurity SOC, you see problems all day long of like, why doesn't this tech work better? Or why is this a gap? Or why is this a manual process? Like, probably if you stepped back, you would see 10 different opportunities today for improvement over an existing product or a brand new, product or service. So can you take that and then see if other people have the same problem? And if they do, then you might be onto something. Now, it's still going to be a hard journey and a long journey, but that's really where it starts. And then you just keep iterating and iterating and iterating. At Obsidian, it's only been around for 18 months. We've talked to over 150 companies, right? That's a lot. That's like, 2 to 3 every week, nonstop. And we're just craving that feedback because you just want to get as many people's feedback on the problem space or the problem set as possible and try to incorporate that into what you're building. So maybe I'll take a break there, but I'm happy to talk about anything related to the Carbon Black journey, the Obsidian journey, startups in general. But, my sort of last statement here is I recommend anyone who's listening that has any inkling to do a startup to go do it. Now, maybe not today, or maybe today, but go either start something at some point in your life or join an early company at, employee number 5 or 15 or even, 100, but be in that early stage where you really get to see everything and have a huge impact.
All right, so let's take a break, hear from our sponsors, be right back.
We'll be right back with the rest of today's show right after these brief messages from our sponsors. Cyber Resilience Institute helps build strong cyber communities designed to prevent members from attack. Like building a neighborhood watch, it takes coordination and a sharing community to protect our identities and valuables in the virtual world. Typically, we hear that organizations know they need to do something to protect their cyber assets, but don't know where to begin. Let Cyber Resilience Institute help your community create an action plan. Cyber Resilience Institute will build your community or business marketplace so that it is designed to support a collective cyber defense. Contact them for more information at cyberresilienceinstitute.org.
Right, welcome back to New Cyber Frontier. We are in the middle of a high energy show with Ben Johnson, the CTO and founder of Obsidian, about the startup journey. And why, Ben, while you were talking, I even jotted down some notes. I figured I wouldn't be able to get a word in edgewise, so I'd wait until you did a break. And I have a couple questions or things that I want you to elaborate on that I heard you say. And I think we talked pretty well about blend your solution with your customers' ideas. But something that, like I asked you before the show, what's your problem you're trying to solve? And so often I hear in cybersecurity that people have to tell the customer their problem and then tell them they have a solution for it because the customer doesn't know they have the problem. So in the cyber industry, that's a big problem, that they don't know what you're doing until you tell them. How do you kind of work around that? Is that what the 100 conversations in the last year are about? Talk about that piece.
Yeah, I think in cyber we're in a fortunate place where most of the people you're talking to, like if I'm a vendor or you're a vendor, and you're talking to the enterprise security team or the corporate security team or whomever, I think they actually have a pretty good grasp on what their problems are. They've gotten better at understanding where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are, where's the risk, what are the threats actually accomplishing, that kind of thing. So I think it's actually shifted a little bit to, okay, I have a ton of problems. Why is the problem you're solving a priority? Or I can actually get budget now, but why would I pick you over these 50 other vendors, right? So there are some huge challenges in talking with companies. I think we're fortunate that over the course of those discussions, and then look, we're super fortunate. So I mentioned people and relationships before. We're super fortunate that, at Carbon Black, we treated our customers really well. My co-founders, they treated their customers from Cylance really well. And so those customers take our calls, right? That doesn't mean we didn't have problems or we didn't have to fight fires or push out hot fixes or things like that. But, in general, we treated people really well and respectful, and we wanted to provide continuous value. And so those people will take our calls. So just to tie back to the startup statements from before, it is really hard to start getting some customers to take your calls or take your meetings or hear you out if you've never sort of made a name for yourself or have like a resume that maybe warrants those discussions. So you have to kind of fight through that and get those meetings or ask for help or things like that to get those meetings. But then make sure you treat people really well so they'll take your calls. But back to your question, through these 150 conversations, plus other advisory conversations and, talk to investors and our board and things like that have ideas, you start to hear recurring themes that then make it pretty crystal clear what some of the problems are. And then you try out maybe a slightly different pitch. Like, for example, I give a different pitch deck almost every single time. Just minor tweaks. Sometimes it's totally rearranging slides. Sometimes it's new slides. Sometimes it's just a couple words. But I try to have that continuous improvement, sort of like a software engineering or something, right? We're continuously trying to update and patch. The same thing with your presentation or your slide deck, things like that. And so then you start to really figure out like what resonates and what's going to cut to the chase faster. And so we've been able to do that. Interesting.
So yeah, that was a good explanation. Two other points that you had mentioned that I wanted you to elaborate on. The first one, your process for getting good talent, and the second one is then when that talent or something becomes an issue, the course correction. Explain your processes and maybe experience you've had in that area.
Yeah, so it's hard, right? Like getting talent, hiring, recruiting, it's hard. We're all trying to get the best people we can, and overall the pool of talent is not enough. So it's about creating a positive environment. And I think there's been studies lately that there's really two main things that technical people want. They want to be surrounded by very smart people, right? So I call that talent density, and I think that comes out of Patty McCord, who is the chief people officer for Netflix, wrote a great book called Powerful, and I'm a huge book geek as well. But talent density. So they want to be surrounded by other great, smart people. I think that makes sense, right? And the second thing is they want to be given challenges. They want to solve hard problems. They don't want to just be sitting there feeling that they're wasting their time or it's something that doesn't really require their skill sets, et cetera. So you have to try to create an environment where people are stepping in, they're working with great people, they're solving hard problems, and then there's paths to grow, and they're getting, sort of pushed in different directions. But then it's hard because then you have to think about other things, like what perks do you offer? What's your, sort of benefits and healthcare and beer or ping pong tables or whatever it is. And that's where you have to figure out your culture. And there's no right formula, and some people it's, one way, and other people it's another, and sometimes it's more geographically tied. Maybe West Coast is a little bit sort of, more easygoing than the East Coast sometimes. But again, that kind of depends on the environment. The second thing you asked about with employees and things like that is, again, just because I'm a huge book nerd as well, I read this great book called Turn the Ship Around by a submarine captain. And he had a great quote, and it was, "A little rudder far from the shore is a lot better than a lot of rudder at the shore," which is actually like a Navy philosophy. Like just minor course corrections way away from land is going to be much better for the submarine than, having to all of a sudden be like Titanic and try to avoid, something. But it's the same thing with people. Like it's that, hey, you can see someone, usually if you keep your eye out, you can see them starting to maybe go down the wrong path, whether that's, pick something like they start showing up for most meetings late, or you can see they're sort of pulling away from the team members, or they're starting to slip on their delivery schedules, or whatever it is. There's usually early indicators that, maybe something's not great, and maybe they're frustrated with you, their boss or manager or leader. Maybe it's just a home thing, like everyone goes through, stuff at home or family or whatever. But having more open, honest conversations more frequently typically helps. Now, the challenge with that is time, right? Like, I was doing one-on-ones with pretty much everyone here at Obsidian, and I love it. It's like pretty much my favorite thing to do. But if we're at the size now where if I do that, let's say every 2 weeks, that's basically my whole 2 weeks. It's just meeting with the team, and there's no time for strategy or execution or meeting with customers or things like that. So you have to figure out how to balance that too, and it all comes back to sort of that time management. How do you best spend your time? But I would say those are some things to think about when it comes to people.
Yeah, and I like that topic you just started down a path on, and I'll even ask for advice on my own world here. How do you balance all, one, the individual attention you're talking about, two, your job as visionary and directing and making progress on that as CTO, and then maybe even a third one, how do you manage, all the customer input, all the customer meetings, how much time do you spend on each one? How do you decide where to multitask and fit things in? What's your process there? Just in general, I guess.
So I'm always trying to self-improve, and so I can be honest and say I haven't figured it out exactly. But what I tend to do is, first of all, just through a lot of practice, you start to get pretty good at just sort of in your own mind, like, hey, I haven't really thought about this part of the business, or I haven't really worked on this one of my duties in a while, so I probably need to do that. But then you could maybe start using tooling or your calendar. So literally what I've started doing this week is every single time in my calendar now has a calendar appointment, right? So what I mean by that is, let's say today I had an employee meeting and I had a customer meeting, or I had this podcast and a couple other things. So let's say 6 of the hours are open. What I'll do is I'll actually say, hey, this hour is email. And I'll literally block that out.
Yeah.
And this hour is product strategy. And I've typically not done that because it takes a lot of time just to, sort of get your calendar in order and sort of figure that out. But what I'm trying is to really, the night before, be thoughtful of how am I going to spend tomorrow and what truly matters. And then I'm using different tools to then, at the end of the week, it looks at your Google Calendar or whatever, but for me, Google Calendar. And then it actually puts them in categories and says, oh, you spent this much time talking to customers. You spent this much time with employees. You spent this much time, doing email or other random things, et cetera, this much on, sort of marketing, or this much on engineering, et cetera. So that's something I'm really working on. But I think in general, you when you're moving fast, you have to start to do that. The other thing is really trying to share information and really trying to delegate. And I know those are essentially cliches, but like, for example, with customer meetings, like, I try to not be the only one in a customer meeting. Like, we have a great head of product, Sean Borman, who goes to a lot of customer meetings now, and in fact, he'll probably do more than I do pretty soon. But whoever it is, like, we also write up notes, and we try to share them with as many people as possible, so people get an understanding of, like, what are customers really asking for and what are their pain points. And then the delegation thing, like, does this task truly require me, or is there someone else that can do it, and maybe even someone that's better to do that? And all of this, there's no exact formula, but I think the fundamental thing is that consistent, like, continuous sort of questioning of, am I spending my time the right way? And since I'm a huge book nerd, I'm going to throw out my absolute favorite book is Essentialism, where it's how do you focus on the vital few versus the trivial many. So I know I'm throwing a lot of books out here, but I absolutely believe in all of this sort of self-help, business leadership type stuff. Essentialism is all about how do you focus on a few things to get more done.
Wow. So I'm taking a deep breath here, and just love the energy. So if we're getting kind of close to the end of our time, but I wanted you to talk about what it is you're doing there at Obsidian, and basically the problem you're solving and what you're doing, and a little bit about what your needs are, what your outreaches looks like, and who you need to engage with. So give us kind of that 2 or 3 minutes about what you have going on with Obsidian.
Yeah, so we're 40 people. We're in Southern California. We're really early stage. We don't typically go into all of the details of what we're doing simply because we're not quite fully launched yet. But what I will say is we have launched early access programs, so customers are starting to play around with our product. And we're really focused on the identity space. So we're really focused on what's going on from a user or account perspective. And really, though, taking a slightly different look. Like, we're not trying to be the authentication. We're not trying to be the ones that you log in through, like an Okta or a Duo. We're really trying to apply data science and analytics to say, okay, who has what access, and should they have that access? So to think about it another way, think about identity creep. Like, everyone has too many accounts that you were given 3 years ago, or you're added to some Active Directory group, and that kind of thing. Those become a mess very quickly. And how can you start to look at what do people actually do day to day, and then how can I shrink that surface area? How can I shrink their overall, essentially, account privilege? So that's really what our focus is this identity intelligence or sort of analytics-driven identity.
Okay, and your products will be marketed to business. We're not going to see anything on the Play Store or something. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're very focused on enterprise. We will, also talk to small and medium size, but typically, like most cybersecurity startups, we're going to talk to some of the bigger companies out there. And to be honest, a lot of the sort of access creep or identity creep problems are extremely prevalent at the large companies, because people have been there 15 years and have switched whole teams or organizations, and they still have access to source code, even though they now work in finance or whatever, right? So it's just a whole bunch of problems to solve there.
Okay, so if you had to say who should reach out to you and contact you, and what would you, how would they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so our website's obsidiansecurity.com. We're at ObsidianSec on Twitter, and we also have a LinkedIn page. I am at Chicago Ben, and I'm on LinkedIn. I love connecting. We would love to talk to enterprises or sort of mid-sized businesses too. Not going to turn you away if you're a smaller business if you want to chat, but we're open to discussions around are we going to help you out with understanding sort of who has what access, should they have that, and what they're doing with that. We're a little bit more cloud app focused, but we believe in a hybrid world, so we're not ignoring some of your on-prem assets and directories and things like that.
All right.
And we're also looking to hire, right? Like, all of us, like I said, need good people. So our website has the link to our current openings, and, would love to get some applications too.
Definitely. We can start pointing people your way on that one for sure. But thanks so much for joining today, Ben. I'm going to need to kind of digest all this myself, but wow, thank you so much. It's been definitely a pleasure.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I had a great time. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day. Bye. The views or opinions expressed during this podcast are not those of Colorado Technical University.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of New Cyber Frontier. Remember to get involved. Often we think that someone else will handle privacy and security in the virtual world, but you are the only one truly in command of your virtual fate. Join our mailing list so we can keep you informed of breaking news and new releases. If you have an idea, if you have a question that you would like to hear answered, or if you want to get involved with our efforts, reach out to us at newcyberfrontier.com. We also encourage you to visit our sponsors' links, as they are the ones that really make this show possible. I want to thank each of you for supporting the show, and we look forward to seeing you back for the next episode of New Cyber Frontier.